All right. Okay. I think we might get started then. So firstly, a thank you to everyone who's here. It's great to have you here. As Amir said, it's hard to believe that we're 100 days into Support at Home already. I'm sure for some of you out there, it's felt like a very long 100 days. And hopefully there's a few others out there who it's been a bit more smooth sailing for. It's felt fairly quick. Um, okay, so um, just a couple of items of housekeeping first. So the first and most important thing is to ask questions. So you'll see there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Please ask as many questions as you can. You'll see in a minute or two that we've got some very expert people on this panel. So the chances are that if something can be answered, then one of these three people will be able to answer it for you. And we'll try and answer everything online. But even if we can't get to it there, we'll certainly make sure that we reply back to you by email. If you're having troubles, you can't hear me or you can't see me, please let me know. Send me an email or drop me a line on the chat, and I'll do my best to fix that issue. And lastly, we are going to send you the slides, but I will caveat that 90% of what's going to be going on in this webinar will be discussion. So there's going to be a lot of, I mean, that's the whole point of this panel that we've put here together. There's going to be a lot of sort of back and forth between them, a lot of answering those questions. So there won't be a huge amount on the slides, and there will be times during the webinar where I switch the slides off and we're just going to be focused on the panelists. So don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your computer when that happens. I just want us to be able to focus on the experts we have at hand. And on that note, let's switch our attention then to the panelists. So first up, I'd like to introduce Cara Sinclair. Cara is currently the Financial Systems Controller at Rise Network. I've known Cara for a few years now, and I can honestly say that Cara knows her way around a spreadsheet better than I know my way around my own house. I think, well, I mean, we'll probably come to it a bit later when we do the Rise story, but the spreadsheet, the master spreadsheet, as Cara and the team called it, that had been built at Rise was absolute artwork. Probably the type of artwork which might give you nightmares, but an artwork nevertheless. So not only that, but Cara is one of the few people who is across both the NDIS and supported home schemes. She's a real expert on both, and she's a huge asset, obviously, to Rise. And also, we're very lucky to have her on the webinar today to be able to answer some of our questions and tell us her story. So welcome, Cara. Next, we have Luke Benson. So many of you probably already know Luke. He's the type of person that everyone somehow seems to know, and Luke knows everyone. He's one of those people who, if you say, oh, can you help me with a connection to this? He's certainly going to know someone who can help you. Luke is the principal consultant at Blue Bike Solutions, who help the community sector through business transformation and adopting new technology. He is a bit of a geek, and I'm sure that will be obvious by the end of this webinar. Aside from being a familiar face on the aged care technology webinars, Luke is also the closest that any human has ever come to being a fountain of knowledge, particularly when it comes to support at home. He sees the big picture, but he's also very, very deep in the weeds when it comes to anything technical. He knows how all the APIs work. He knows what the responses are to this and that. He knows how the regulations work. In fact, somehow he knows how the regulations work better than the regulators themselves. We are, again, also very lucky to have Luke with us today. Welcome, Luke. And lastly,
That's a very over the top introduction.
Oh, we have to be a little bit generous on these things. It's got a smile on your face. That's good.
Yeah.
And next we have Amir. Amir Hosseini is the founder and CEO of QuickClaim, which sits at the sort of intersection between service delivery and finance in organizations servicing the care sector, so the NDIS and supported home schemes. And Amir's vision for QuickClaim is to help those organizations develop a rigorous and programmatic approach to billing and claiming so that they can achieve financial sustainability. And certainly for those of you who have are also part of the NDIS, you'll know that financial sustainability is a bit of a buzzword, and it's much easier said than done. But that is certainly part of what quitclaim is all about. Amir's background is in data analysis, and he's worked across the disability and tech sectors for the best part of 20 years now. And on a more humorous note, and I can say this because I work with Amir and I've known him also for a few years, Amir is the only person I know who's capable of developing software that can keep track of millions of transactions going back and forth between different government portals and so on, but he cannot keep track of time. I was very impressed to see him turn up early to this webinar, so well done, Amir. Thank you very much. Um, okay, so enough of that. Last thing before you get rid of me and I hand it over to the panelists, I just got to go quickly through the agenda. So first, we're going to talk a bit about what the realities of the support home scheme are. Obviously, we're 100 days in. What have we learned, etc. Then we're going to focus a bit more on claiming and participant statements. I know that is a major bugbear for many of you out there, particularly statements has been a bit of a nightmare. And we're going to sort of talk a bit to what we've seen that's both good and bad. Then we're, speaking of good, going to move on to a case study. And Cara is going to tell us a bit of a story about Rise Network. We'll understand what their approach to supporter home has been, and what Cara and the team have learnt. We'll then look into our crystal ball and we'll see what the next 100 days have got for us in plan, and also what the scheme is likely to evolve into over the coming years. And finally, we'll get to a bit of Q&A. So as I said, feel free to please ask questions during the webinar. Don't wait until that last Q&A bit to submit your questions. Depending on how things go, we might answer those questions during the webinar, or we might get to them at that last section. But please submit them at any time. As soon as the question comes into your head, please feel free to send that through. Okay, so the realities of support at home. So I think, and probably let's start with you on this one, on Luke. The first 100 days have sort of tested whether our systems were truly ready for support at home. And I'm sure that's a bit of a loaded gun topic for you, but I'd like to get your view on how well you think the various software vendors and even the tech teams at different providers, how well have we gone with those first 100 days, and were our systems really ready?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ben, and it's definitely one of those it depends answers, unfortunately. But I think there's also a good separation of the ideas of, was the software ready, but was the data ready as well, and the data was going to be processed. And then there's the X factor that none of this had been tested until November 1st. There'd been some basic testing from some providers with the APIs from Services Australia, but essentially we were in an untested system from November 1st. So I would say we've got everything from the worst case scenarios of some providers not being able to claim at all the way through to some stories of success. And it covers also a spectrum of, I don't think that discriminates based on the size of the organization. I think it's something that has to do much more with software and process and data than probably anything to do with whether you're big or small, because we've seen success cases at both ends of that spectrum.
Cool. Yeah, so maybe at this point, then also I get your perspective on this, Cara. Like, how have the first 100 days been for you, just generally? Obviously, we'll get into specifics of the Rise story, but what have you experienced over that time?
Yeah, look, I think there's been a lot of change coming from moving from home care package into support at home. There was a lot of change that nobody was really ready for. But yeah, I think we succeeded, we've managed, we've coped, and that largely goes to quick claims. But yeah, what we've been able to do within quick claims has really helped.
Okay, excellent, cool. Amir, what do you think? What was the biggest shock for you, maybe, after having gone through the first 100 days? Obviously, we all had an idea of what this scheme would look like beforehand. We were all trying to get ready, but in that first 100 days since then, What's been the most surprising thing? What is the most shocking thing, maybe even?
Uh, I think I can call two things. One was that how complex the scheme is, because yes, you're right. We've gone through the even the API implementation and testing before, and you think that you cover all the scenarios when you're designing the system. But when it goes live and you see real data and real use case, you understand how complicated it is. It's hugely complicated. Like the whole process of budget tracking and what's happening in cancellation and refund and all those payment reconciliation, invoicing. But also the on a technical side, another big shock was more on a non-functional requirement of APIs. So we had massive challenges on um, some of the APIs is not working as expected or timeout. And gladly, Services Australia's engineers are really very, very cooperative and on top of things, and they're fixing things very, very quickly. But as a system which is in production, that is still challenges going with the technology. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I would echo that. I think, despite the fact that it's easy to point your finger at them, like Service Australia have actually been a breath of fresh air in terms of how they have treated the sector. They have taken every concern on board. They've made every effort to answer our questions. And having worked across both the NDIS and aged care sectors, I can tell you that Services Australia are doing an excellent job. So, as I said, while it's easy to point fingers like that, I think they are genuinely working as hard as they can to put something great in front of us. Luke, a question for you. What's the question what's the concern that most providers have brought to you? What have you heard most from a provider in terms of their concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stark one is we're not claiming yet, right? And also before that, 30 days, 20 days before that, it was we haven't finished the claims for HCP. And again, good responsiveness to these scenarios as they're unfolding for the government, for the Services Australia to find a way to extend some deadlines and things. I mean, it's the only option, but at least it's happening, right? And yeah, so I think it's hard to get past that massive challenge that's basically out there for everyone. That's their first challenge, which is can we successfully process all the different types of claims that are in our data? And then, as we're going to talk about, we know what comes next is statements, and it's no easier and no more straightforward. And so that's probably those that have moved onto the statements level and are starting to get statements out and now facing the significant challenges of trying to get things to reconcile and working out what do we do about delivery dates and what do we do about, all the different balances. So it's certainly been this was always going to be the pointy end of the implementation was this claiming and statements piece from a financial management perspective. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just say everyone's experiencing the thing that I wouldn't say it's the thing that they were most worried about because there's not mass sector failure. There are pockets of serious impact and they're getting attention, I understand, from the government. They're directly intervening in those pockets. So hopefully it's not, mass issues, but it's certainly hitting some providers very hard, this process.
Yeah, certainly. I might just stick with you for another moment, Luke. I mean, we had this situation where we were obviously only able to really test the system after it went live, which, if anyone's designing a system, they don't say, oh, okay, let's just start going live and then we'll figure things out. Do you think we could have done anything differently with the benefit of hindsight now? I mean, like, obviously everyone was trying to do their best and we had a very rushed timeline, even if it was delayed. What might you have suggested, or what might you go back in time and tell either yourself or Service Australia 6 months ago to do differently?
Um, if I could go back in time, I wish there was an opportunity to put an amnesty on statements until we get to, say, April, May or something, and just say the information in Services Australia is the best information for anyone to look at. And just take the heat out of a moment that's going to create a lot of complaints and a lot of issues that'll cascade up through the complaints mechanisms, and there will be a spike of these. And I feel like that was avoidable, but it would have been an impact for clients and, but it's going to be an impact anyway. So that's probably the one thing I wish we could have bought ourselves, was some time to take the risk out of what's going to be a really complex, because a statement is someone's, it's their opportunity to kind of check in with what's happened, and they get family members involved, and they peruse and scrutinize sometimes these things. Gee, there's a lot of risk waiting to go on,
Yes.
basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think probably to sort of echo your sentiment, having the requirement of being able to generate a statement the following month for the very first month, when you couldn't even claim until that same following month, was ambitious. I'm not sure that we would have just kicked the can down the road and had the problem 6 months later instead of on time, but who knows? But
We
yeah,
could have tested. We could have tested. We could have
that's
created
true.
versions.
That's
We could have
true.
got it out there for experience and feedback,
That,
but we didn't get that chance. So I can't look backwards. I would say looking forwards, what can be done to kind of create a bit of a default statement or something like that from the government. Let's see what's possible over the next
yeah.
couple of months. But Service Australia have been really responsive, as you've said, and if the sector's needing help en masse, I think we're finding ways to do it.
Yeah, okay. Yep. What about you, Cara? Do you feel like the department and Services Australia could have done a better job in sort of preparing you as a provider to get ready, or was everything done that could have been done?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely things they could have done. Like there was a lot of information that went out, but depending on, I guess, who read it and how it was interpreted, could mean multiple different things with how things need to be displayed on statements. So it was almost too much information to get clear black and white of what we actually needed. But yeah, I think they could have definitely like issued some sort of template or something to at least get us started with the statement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the template we got was we all know it was the 10-page
Yeah,
rich and valuable and interesting Word document.
too much information.
That bore no relationship to anything we could produce from a system in the time. So yeah, but I think it's, yeah, Kari, you're right. Like it's kind of like what would have simplified and taken out some risk is kind of some reflections. But yeah, there's a path ahead. I would also say probably that there was a structural problem throughout that we all knew about, which was the systems couldn't go online until November 1st because of legislation being linked to the Act and everything else. I hope there's not another one of those milestones ahead of us legislatively that blocks a technology change from happening because of something in a future dated thing. I don't think there are, but watch this. Watch this space. Right, we need access
Which
to any upgrades now
That
earlier than
sounds
they can
ominous.
be deployed.
which is inevitable if you think about that in NDIS after 10 years. We still have this legislation change and the scheme changes almost every year, and major changes happening now as in the budgeting and stuff. So it's probably inevitable. It is just how quickly systems and technology, and first of all, the Services Australia IT can address and tackle those, and then how quickly we as a sector or software vendors can adopt that change, which is a very challenging topic in NDIS at the moment, because if you put a legislation in place when there is not the infrastructure to deliver that, it just creates all this messiness, which hopefully we won't have in support at home.
I would also say, look, we swung from no line items to every line item overnight.
Yeah.
That was our structural change system-wise. That is incredible to have pulled off as a sector at once. And I know it's messy at the moment, but jeepers, like to get all that infrastructure in place and get everyone into the place they can do that. That was a massive change. That there were no exceptions. Everything has to go through the system at a line item level now.
Yeah. So on that subject, I might move on over to the next slide and talk a bit more in depth about claims and statements and what we expected, what we have been stuck with. But let's start maybe first, again, going to a slightly more technical perspective. Amir, maybe this is for you. There, as you said, like there was a lot of uncertainty of how the APIs would work, and for the first time ever, Services Australia said, that APIs were their preferred method. They initially said they weren't going to support CSVs at all. Then they sort of walked that back a bit and said, like file uploads are going to be acceptable. I mean, how have you found the technology? How have you found the ability to use those APIs, and are they sort of up to scratch for what you think we need going forward?
As if you look at from technology perspective, from day one, I love the API first approach that Support at Home had, unlike NDIS, because API first means that you are opening up the integration and automation for the long term. So in long run, it is fantastic. Um, but when you go API first, if software vendors aren't ready, you are putting pressure back to the sector and providers, and that's what happened. And then Service Australia, lots of things wasn't even built that you do it via CSV, and they had to deliver because it was lots of objection from sector. We cannot operate with API. API is for software companies. So I think they did an okay job maybe on that part, but API is awesome because they delivered over 100, I don't know, it's 150 or something. If you go detail in API, every single detail, it was over 150 test cases to run. It's like they have developed massive API system behind the scene. So again, in long term, this is awesome because everything can be automated in different software vendors. But in the short term, this is a challenge that some of these functional requirements aren't available in use of a CSV, or it's very hard to do it in CSV or in file. And this is a massive shift that, okay, forget about previous schemes and forget about manual handling, monthly claiming, just go with systematic approach, which requires vendors to be heavily involved and build as well.
Yeah. So Luke, on that subject, how many, let's just say we have, say, 10 or 12 major sort of suppliers across the industry. So it's like CRM/CMS providers across the industry. How many of those do you think were ready on maybe not necessarily November 1, but certainly December 1 to start launching claims and statements?
I think probably about half of the software companies were well set up for it, and that wouldn't necessarily impact half the market because there were some software companies who are ready, who have a smaller footprint, and vice versa. So I think, yeah, I think broadly speaking, people made it. Like there were people on November 1st successfully processing data. You guys were one of them, right? So the system worked from November 1st, and the software vendors who'd been able to get themselves into a position of readiness were able to use it. Unfortunately, what shouldn't have been was a very long tail of some software vendors struggling. And that shouldn't have been the case because everything was there and working on November 1st. It wasn't the case that, the government systems don't work. Very much they worked. And so that's been a real challenge. And I think it's obviously the cause of most of the heartache that's happening. I do think there's a recovery path for a lot of it. I do worry about the amount of off-platform Excel-based sort of claiming that's had to happen temporarily for people who weren't set up to think they were going to do the CSV process. They might have been thinking they were going to be using the API processes and then they haven't worked. So they're the sort of challenges we're encountering in real time. So, yeah, and I think there are other pressure points in the system. We're talking a lot about claiming and everything, but it all starts with data that is claim ready. And that's
right.
Been, we have to sort of look upstream and look, we can talk technically and talk about billing and claiming, but there's been a massive challenge for the sector to get data into a position that it can be used for claiming.
Yeah, so that's a good point you bring up there. I mean, as you said earlier, we've moved to a completely itemized billing structure from not having had to do that earlier. I mean, how do you feel like that those items, those billable objects, were well defined and people were sort of able to start using them more or less from day one, or a lot of it was trial and error with things like wraparound services and what needs an attachment and what doesn't need to be able to claim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's been, and Cara will talk to those sort of lived experiences of what needed. extra process or even maybe a workaround temporarily or something to get going, to get a claim working. And Kari, you'll definitely talk to us about that experience. But it's more general day to day, and also we'll talk about some of the things of you can have all your data ready, but if the system that the data's in can't release that data for billing because it needs to go through a month-end process or something, you're effectively blocked by your own system from advancing a claiming process. So, and we're seeing a bit of that too, where really month end is not month end anymore. It's a very different month end post November 1st. And sometimes I think in some cases the software hasn't adjusted for that, and the business cycles and things haven't adjusted for that yet.
Yeah, certainly. And certainly, we know from having spoken to quite a few vendors that, as you said, like you've got to completely radically change how you approach the concept of claiming from being that just once a month process to being like, constantly submitting, receiving, claiming, to really be on top of that. And month end should just be a matter of wrapping loose ends up rather than the start of the process.
Yeah. And this, look, there's people on the call today who will have had an experience of saying, we'd love to get to monthly claiming. We're not even close to the concept of repeating something ever at the moment. We're in full firefighting mode, just trying to get the cash flow engine running after November 1st. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of, like, we're talking as though it's constant claiming is a realistic thing. I think we've got to take a reality pill as well and say there's many who are just trying to get a cycle going, something cyclical. So yeah, big disruption, but
Yeah.
the good thing is it does work. So everybody who's struggling can know that there is a path to success. It's not like a whole sector is sitting there saying the system doesn't work, which
That's
is
right.
a really big positive for everyone risk-wise.
Yeah. But Mia, a question for you. And I know, from our experience with a few different clients that, when it came to maybe doing reconciliations at the end of the month and saying, hey, what belongs in this budget? What's in that budget? Where are we claiming from for this object? It wasn't easy. Do you want to talk us through some of the challenges that you experienced and what you had to do to sort of help get around them when it comes to understanding budgets and reconciling for the end of the month?
Yeah, so I think budget reconciliation, a statement generation, a splitting invoice to co-contribution and department, they should all be really system responsibility, not people. And if it's not today, it's gonna change in future. But the challenges was always definitely looking at a vendor, looking at someone who has to develop that functionality in our system. It was always those reconciliation, because there is a question in the chat that someone asked that if the payment is paid across multiple budget, how it's appeared in the statement report. I answered that question now as well. So in the statement data that we get from API, it's one line and it is correct, but there is a sub object that says which budget is deducted from. So this minor detail that you need to now have in your reconciliation process, that, okay, there is $100 budget deduction that has a $10 co-contribution, is now divided between two different budgets, prorated there. So these are all very complicated to solve when you want to do it in Excel, or if you want to prepare a statement manually. But again, all of that is experience and lesson learned for vendors, and then it has to be in the system. System has to reconcile every single data point, from budget to services claimed to the payment items and payment statement, to be able to correctly divide that department payment and contribution payment. And also we find another thing that we call it gap, which is not really, which is like you claim for $100 and departments pay you $50, and it's identifying that there is a $10 to pay and there's a $40 nowhere, like it's a gap. And it's not an error. You don't see that in anywhere. It's just that when you calculate and numbers, you realize that there is a gap in payment. And then understanding why the gap is happening and who is going to pay for that. Is it a write-off or not? This is also critical. But if you want to have a correct statement issued, you need to have all of your data to reconcile to the cent And that's the challenge basically in reconciliation.
Do you think we'll get to a point where people are able to generate statements just with the click of a mouse?
Absolutely. We even have it today. So statements are two, I see it as two different statements. One is your monthly statement that you are just telling people how much fund is available in different funds. And that is based on the data from Services Australia. Like that is absolutely click of a button. Even today is a click of a button for us. But there's a second part, which is your financial statement. Who paid the co-contribution, who hasn't, how much is overdue. That's ledger balance. That is challenging because that needs all the invoices to be up to date, all the accounts to be tracked. And if you have a multiple system, like a finance system tracking some of those financials, and you have another system that you are using for claiming or your CRM, now the link or integration between the systems required, and that's going to be a challenging process.
Cara, can I? Oh, sorry, I was just going to ask quickly, Ben. Cara, I wanted to ask you a question about, Ben asked me before about the billing objects and that sort of notion of, is it right? Is if they set up the system well? One of the things we noticed early on in the design and how everything was explained to us from Services Australia was that there were not a lot of constraints on what a line item could be. It had to have a service ID, it had to have, um, various mandatory fields, but that flexibility of you could put any dollar amount and any quantity amount into fields. Have you been using, like, has that been required for you? Does that make some sense? Yeah.
There was definitely restrictions on the quantity where they had to be in increments of 0.25.
Oh, yeah.
So we had a few, we had changes around that on the exports.
Yeah.
But do you just mean flexibility in terms of what the uploads to Service Australia?
Yeah, kind of like not
versus...
requiring too much detail on every line item that would mean you had to have, it's just something I noticed as a feature when they designed it was it seemed fairly flexible.
Yeah, I think, when we first did the first few imports, both scheduling transaction imports as well as our expenses, there was definitely a lot more flexibility. Like if we had put in an incorrect code, it would still generally go through. I think in the last couple of months, that's definitely tightened up, and they're rejecting a lot more.
And we know what's coming, right? We know approved services is coming as a restriction. They just deferred turning it on. So there will definitely be a sting in the tail when we go to claim for services for a new client who hasn't got an approved service.
Yeah, so I feel like they left it very open for those first couple of months, and they're slowly tightening things up.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right. Well, this might be a good opportunity then to move on to the Rise story for the last few months, Cara. I'll give. Actually, maybe in fact, maybe I won't do that. People have probably heard enough from me. Do you want to give us a bit of a background to who Rise are, who you service, and maybe sort of like the opening story about how you are approaching support at home in maybe the 100 days before and the 100 days after?
Sure. So a little bit of background on Rise is we're a not-for-profit. We operate out of Perth, WA, and we do disability, aged care, mental health, and youth, multiple funders. The reason we kind of moved over to quick claims in the beginning, a couple of years ago, was because we were trying to do all of our NDIS claiming in-house, and it was all very manual. And we used what we called a master spreadsheet for all of our NDIS claims, payments, reconciliations. And we've got a couple of my funding team members here today who owned that. But yeah, it was a very cumbersome spreadsheet, lots of formulas, lots of human error, or room for human error. And we just needed something within a system to be able to manage that. So we could replace it. Sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say, what do you think, having experience at NDIS, and obviously that has itemized billing to it too, do you think that gave you a bit of a leg up when it came to your support at home approach, or were the two systems completely different?
No, absolutely. So I think just in terms of being prepared and already doing our NDIS claiming out of quick claims definitely gave us, I guess, a leg up. We already knew what sort of exports we needed from our client case management system. We knew how quick claims worked. And we already also had that integration between quick claims and our finance system set up. So we already had some of the, like we still had to create some support at home specific journals, but yeah, we still had the API connection and everything ready to go. So yeah, it definitely gave us a bit of a head start, I guess, for support at home. But in terms of new challenges, there was, all the itemized billing, the serve codes, the wraparound codes, statements, purchase orders. So we still had a lot of other things we had to work out.
Yep. Question for you, so only slightly related. If you had tried to go out and tell all your care participants ahead of time what their co-contribution rates are and how much to expect to pay each month, how closely do you think that would correlate with what they're actually paying? Like, do you feel like you were sort of well advised by the department into what to expect, or is it just the reality being completely different?
That's a little bit tricky. I'm not really sure. I know that information is all within Service Australia, but if we've had to go out to our clients and tell them what that was going to look like, I don't know how accurate it would have been.
I think
fair enough.
And Ben, in that space, just to lean into that a bit, because the cohort of the 300,000 current clients in the sector with packages from HCP, they obviously 90% of them are genuinely not going to be contributing because they're excluded from it because of the pension status. And then because of that, and then the income tested fee piece being the cap or the no worse off people. So it's really interesting. Those people have got rules applying to them in the system in Services Australia that are zeroing out their contributions and doing all those sorts of things. So their budgets would have told them they weren't going to be contributing, and then they won't be contributing for 9 out of 10 people probably in the sector. So it's really interesting because we don't have a huge sample of people. We are anticipating a lot more debtor management, a lot more accounts receivable, dunning processes and those things, but it hasn't emerged yet, I don't think, at scale because of this almost artificial tail.
No, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And even for those people who were contributing under the home care package, those co-contributions don't actually apply whilst they're using their home care package funds.
If they're using their unspent
that's
funds.
right. So if they've got carried over funds, which almost everyone would have, that probably doesn't apply. So it's a very good point to bring up.
I would say one of the planning things I've seen a bit of that is a bit related to that is that care partners are wanting to be able to help clients almost choose which funding source they would like something to come out of. And I guess it's been a really difficult conversation to talk about it when it comes to claiming. It comes down to the order things were claimed in, and we know you can't control and specify all these things all the time. So there's a balancing act happening as well, I think, to help people be comfortable that they're not going to be paying for things they shouldn't be. But yeah, it's hard to be precise. It's very hard to know exactly what someone will have to contribute.
Yep. Yeah. So maybe just going back to the RISE story again. What were the things that you were sort of worried about in the month or so ahead of the scheme going live? What was most on your mind?
A lot, everything. There was a lot of, so I guess we had to kind of have a contingency plan and what that was going to look like. Whether we had to do manual statements, what our exports from our scheduling system would look like, how we were going to incorporate all of these different serve codes. A lot, like how we were going to get all of our purchase orders aligned to those serve codes as well, and all of the different categories, a change to all of the quantities of those purchase orders. There was a lot.
New supplier rates at the same time,
right.
probably.
Yeah. And there's still a lot. I imagine there's probably still things keeping you up at night about the scheme. But hopefully a lot of those have been sorted by now. One thing that over the years you've experienced, I guess, has been you've tried, or at least almost tried, a couple of different sort of CRMs and systems. You obviously you're transitioning now from a legacy system to a new system. What advice could you give for people listening in terms of what to look out for? Where have you seen things go wrong? What questions have you learned to ask when it comes to sort of adopting new systems?
We have been through a couple, yes. Yeah, we're currently using Procura, which is a non-supported system anymore, and we're currently moving that over into a new system to go live at the end of the year. But I would say if you can prioritize automation and low manual handling, it just avoids any human errors. Obviously, all of that automation requires a lot of testing first just to make sure that it is working how you would expect it to. But I think the more you can do within a system and automate those repetitive tasks, the better. I think if you can build in some strong validation rules, so having some validation on things before you submit them is always better than them going to Service Australia and then coming back with errors. So that, yeah, the pre-validation rules. Audit trails, really important, which obviously we didn't have within our master spreadsheet. But yeah, audit trails are really important to have in a system so you can see who's done what and when, when we've edited it, when we've submitted it, when it's been paid. And that helps with the audits as well. So I don't know if anyone else has, but we've actually had a request from Service Australia with a number of transactions that we've been audited on already. So yeah, having quick claims and having all that transparency in that system really helped with that. And I think also the ability to do bulk updates, bulk uploads, bulk edits is really important as well. There's, a lot of transactions that go through in a month, and if you identify one error which spans 400 clients, if you've got that bulk edit capability, that's really important.
Yeah.
And then obviously as well, like having a vendor who understands the disability and aged care sector and adapts quickly, reads all the latest legislation and interprets that as well. That's really useful.
Cool. All right. So maybe one last question for you. I mean, we've talked a lot about the difficulties of the scheme and the challenges that we faced. Have there been any sort of breaths of fresh air or advantages from having transitioned from HCP to support at home?
Oh, advantages, yes. So we are obviously, I know you've mentioned it before, we're tied to our client case management system. We only do billing monthly in that. So obviously we can only claim our scheduling monthly. But one of the benefits in moving to this support at home model, it's allowed us to actually claim our purchase orders, our external expenses more regularly. So we've actually moved to a weekly claiming for our external expenses, which in fact has helped. It's helped our cash flow out a lot. But what it's also allowed us to do is sometimes, because our payment terms to vendors are 30 days, we're actually claiming for some of those expenses before we're even paying them. So that's one of the biggest benefits to it, is just increased cash flow. There are higher documentation requirements than HCP, so there is a lot more time sort of going into getting the data into quick claims before we can claim it, so getting it claim ready. But yeah, in terms of benefits, it's definitely increased cash flow, and what it's highlighted for us as well is in our move to the new system, being able to claim more regularly or do our billing more regularly.
Yeah, and certainly that helps from a cash flow, and hopefully, under the new system, as you said, you'll be able to claim more frequently altogether, which would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the last topic of the last slide, which is what's coming next. Obviously, it's been a pretty hectic 100 days, but if the NDIS is any guide, and we know the government love a piece of legislation, so there's probably more change coming. Luke, when you look into your crystal ball, what do you see? Or what are we up for next, do you think?
A few things. So we sort of roll out over the next few months, let's say. So I I haven't heard a lot about the event that's happened with the first rollover of quarterly unspent funds from the first mini 2 month
Yep.
quarter of funding. So I'm interested to kind of monitor that a little bit to understand, did it behave, the system behave the way people expected it to in what was brought over from the previous quarter? You guys will probably have the best idea of anyone from the data of what's happening. But I think that's an interesting watch point because there could be challenges around how that's done with timing of payments and all sorts of things. So um, we know what is planned at the end of June, which is a price cap introduction. I say planned because nobody in this call, certainly this panel, knows whether it's going to happen or not on that date. We can, of course, say, look, things have been deferred in the past, but I'm probably at the point now with just saying we are better off planning for this thing happening because the pre-work has to start. And the pre-work there is the budgeting, the rebudgeting, but also all of those agreements that we've just struck with all of these associated providers to get new rate cards and do all these things. They've all got to go through a re-establishment process of some form. So it feels like that's one of the big sleepers is between May and June, needing to
Mm.
get the IHAC per driven capped pricing out there in budgets and obviously a whole lot of business recalibration. You know, who knows what that's going to cause. As soon as I'm sure one of the good things is because a lot of financial modeling was done for support at home, I feel like the sector will be pretty well set up to say we can feed in these new prices and get an idea very quickly of what it's going to do to our business and to our clients and their costs. Um, Whereas we wouldn't have been able to do that previously with HCP. We almost needed to have the ready state for another price change now. And also the 2 monthly price changes on my aged care. I'm not hearing an awful lot about it, but I presume that's because there's not an awful lot of it happening yet. This is that idea of what's the most commonly charged price. And again, quick claim, you guys have like this, you can surface these things for a client really easily. Of like, this was the price point that went in and was claimed most frequently if you want to put that on my aged care. So I think, yeah, a few little sleepers of things that haven't quite become real yet. And then for me, probably the other one that I'm keeping an eye on, and Cara mentioned it, is we are now giving the government the entire journal of aged care for the sector, to do with client expenses and everything like that. So they have the information they need to start auditing, as Cara said, to run their assurance program. They've said the assurance program framework, was set and laid out there a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, and it's on. It's the process of finding evidence of delivery that corresponds to the claims that were made. And I guess one thing I'd say is, given the government will have all the data, it wouldn't be hard for them to data mine and find a lot of occurrences of things being reversed in the system and line items going in 1 month and then coming out the next month because they were claimed in error, possibly. So they're these sort of things that are kind of going to be an interesting adjustment now that the government has this complete data footprint.
Yeah, yeah, it's certainly, that's quite a good planning or like that's been quite sensible from their point of view is to capture all of that data, which is quite different to what's happening in NDIS where you've got intermediaries like plan managers capturing a lot of the data on the way.
I will say, I do wish IHACPA could use the data that's coming into Services Australia as the pricing data they build off. But unfortunately, because it doesn't specify was it a public holiday, a Sunday, and after hours, there's no way to know whether that rate related to anything normal. And so
That
that data is going to have to come from somewhere else. It's not going to come
that's
from the actuals.
that's true, but I think probably they could back a lot of that data out with just
Yeah,
knowing when public holidays happened.
I hope so.
So, Tara, a question for you. Obviously, in NDIS, I think financial sustainability has sort of ebbed and flowed in terms of a theme, and it's been more and less difficult depending on the period. There's a brief honeymoon at the beginning of the scheme, and then looking at NDIS, brief honeymoon at the beginning of the scheme, then COVID was another sort of bit of a honeymoon period in terms of financial viability. What are you expecting for support at home? Are you expecting the same challenges there to be able to provide services in a sustainable way, in a viable way?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. So we experienced a bit of a pricing issue when we first went live. So obviously we revised all of our prices for the start of support at home. In going through the month and claiming, we've identified that there are a few prices that we got wrong. So we're currently going through a pricing review. But then again, everything is going to change when they bring in cap pricing, whether that be June next year or June 2027. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think it's a constantly evolving sort of landscape. And as long as we have a provider that's willing to work with us and quickly, and we'll get there.
Yeah. Hopefully it's less of an issue. Although well, I guess we'll see. Only time will tell, really.
Yeah.
Amir, what's your thoughts in terms of how the scheme is going to evolve from a technical point of view? Have you got any expectations about what services Australia are likely to bring in?
Yes, so obviously a scheme changes the stuff I don't know, but about technical, uh, all these admin burden gonna basically stop at some point because all this system gonna catch up with the automation and API. So issuing a statement is not gonna be a challenge in the future. Reconciling data or issuing invoice is not gonna be a challenging future. Even today, which we are just 100 days with Rise, there's one of our very precise customer, as I call them, because they're very, very, very to the detail on each topic. We are looking at projections and like other things to implement, like hardship steps or things that are more complicated. So these are all gonna very soon stop. And then with the use of AI and with the extensive data which is available internally, I'm sure that it's gonna be a lot of basically easy way to review what's going on, easy reporting, easy way to know how much are we doing a good planning, do we have enough money for delivering services in future, should we change any of our services or pricing wise or delivery wise, which is sustainable or not. These are all going to be very easy to navigate because of the extensive data which is available. In NDIS, the biggest problem after 10 years is, yes, there are sector data available, but when we go from provider to another provider, depending on how well their BI or data warehouse system works internally, there is a very, very different level of data access or level of, for example, AI can be adopted. But in support at home, it's different. Everything is accessible using API. Even if your systems are not connected, you definitely can use AI and advanced analytics very soon. So I think that's gonna, like the way that AI is going, a little bit more governance around how to use it internally. That's definitely the future.
Excellent. Cool. Well, that's a good insight. Thank you. All right. So I might quickly just turn to Q&A because I noticed we've only got a few minutes left. Luke, I saw that there was a question from someone that you wanted to answer. Do you want to read out the question and give us your answer?
Yeah, sure. And I did reference before the fact that in theory, March 1st was the quarterly rollover date. I'm going to ask my friend Amir, who looks at data, and Kara, who looks at data. Have you seen the quarterly rollover data appear for anyone, or has it not appeared
No.
for anyone? Okay. So there was a session, a sector partner session a couple of weeks ago or a week or so ago. There is actually, I think it's already published, the webinar from it. And this topic came up specifically because the extension was being discussed. And I think this specific question was asked and answered that things will remain, that they're not changing anything to do with that quarterly rollover, was the answer I understood. So because of the extension, they're still just going to process it with the data they had, basically. So I don't know 100% on that answer. I'm going to say watch the webinar again or jump to the transcript. But the question was asked and answered in there. And my understanding is we should be seeing quarterly rollover data appearing for the November to, what is it, day 61. So
Yeah, exactly.
61 days after December 31st is the date we should have seen the first
Yeah, and in fact, I think I can see someone has put up
Is
a
showing.
response on
Yeah.
the Q&A
Yeah.
to say that they are seeing the rollover data on the ACPP.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, thank
So
you.
that's something for us to look at as well. Thank
Yeah.
you.
One thing that happened when Service Australia had a mistake in processing some claims, the way they fixed the mistake is they just topped up the previous budget or whatever budget with a new entitlement line. So I'm
Yeah.
not surprised that even if rollover happens and they need to do adjustment, they're gonna probably add different line of entitlement. So these budgets are independent of each other, like each quarter or a different budget number. So it's a really challenge for Services Australia rather than for us, because we really may not need to worry about which budget is getting deducted as, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and certainly the fact that obviously the claim window has been extended by 30 days suggests that even if the rollover data is there, it's obviously subject to change, right? Because you can still claim against the previous period.
I did want to mention something quickly, Ben,
Yeah.
just about
Yeah.
we were having the conversation before about Service Australia and their APIs and the advancements they've made. They have announced an entry-exit API. We're trying to find out the details of it, but it's going to be really important. We know there's a huge gotcha of like people entering and exiting services in Services Australia and making sure that process is fluent and doesn't break down, and then you find out when you try to claim that something wasn't activated. So I feel like that's a win coming soon, hopefully the next 6 months, to
Yeah, absolutely.
get rid of some PDFs or something like that.
Yeah. One last question for you, Luke, from Jing, wanting to know what the sort of like order of operations is from which budget gets drawn down first.
I'm not going to try and attempt to get this right because I always get Commonwealth and the account one mixed up. But it is documented in the program manual. It definitely says the sequence that they happen in. Amir probably knows because he's a nerd. Which one comes first?
No, I think Jing is right with the sequence, but again, you can dictate. Sometimes you can dictate which fund you can specify funds for some claims, but otherwise, again, I'm not 100% sure. That's why I didn't answer.
Yeah, no.
But I think the order is correct. I think what Jing said.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, let's. I think we've got about 10 seconds to go, so let's quickly wrap things up. Really, more than anything, thank you to you, Kara, Luke, and Amir for your wonderful insights today. It's been really great having the three of you on the panel. I think, as I said, between the three of you, there's pretty much everything there is to know about support at home. For anyone else out there listening, again, thank you for attending as well. If you do have any questions, feel free to send them to me, and I will certainly get an answer from one of the three panelists. There is plenty that they know that we haven't gone through today. So if there is anything on your mind, feel free to ask. But otherwise, have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you very much. And we hope to see you again sometime soon. Thanks.
Have a good day.
Thanks, guys. Bye.